Hey everybody, and welcome back to another F1 Roundup video brought to you by the brilliant SeedStream F1 app. This week I'm going to be talking about the talking points coming out of the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which, by the way, has just finished literally a few moments ago. So if there's any post-race penalties or breaking news after the checkered flag, I may have missed it because it's just finished. But we're going to talk about some movement in the driver market, some stories around the driver market which I think could potentially be really interesting, and hint towards other interesting stories that might be related, potentially including ones featuring Adrian Newey and his next move. McLaren's progression continues, Ferrari taking a step forward. We now have a three-way battle at the front, which is fascinating because it's also highlighting some weaknesses at Red Bull that perhaps we hadn't seen up until now. That and potentially anything else I can think of in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Very quickly though, SeedStream. I've talked about it every week because they're sponsoring this video. It's an app that some friends of mine, together with me, created some time ago and have been developing over the course of the last 2 years with your help. It's had a massive redesign, which launched just over a week or so ago. I think it's now very slick, very usable, a brilliant app for anyone who follows Formula One. It is the first app that I open every single morning to get my F1 news, and I'd love that for it to be the same for you. Please go and check it out, and keep an eye towards the end of this video for news of how you might potentially be able to win a copy of the brand new F1 2024 game, which you may know that I am the voice of the race engineering. I have copies to give away. Stay tuned. Right, let's quickly talk about driver market news. The one that we know about is Alex Albon has signed an extension at Williams, a multi-year extension, taking him at least to the end of the 2026 season, possibly even beyond that, which is interesting because it commits his future to a team that at the moment is pretty much last, pretty much at the back of the grid. So what does he know about Williams that has enticed him, a driver which, you know, I think we can all agree, a driver that has talent, a driver that other teams are definitely interested in having, a potential target for somebody like Audi or others. Lots of people would be interested in clambering over each other to get Alex Albon's signature, and yet he signed a long-term deal with the team that's last on the grid. So what has James Vowles and the team at Williams been able to share with him about the future? Probably around 2026 and their plans for the big rule and regulation change that have convinced him that this is the right move for him, when he could have potentially gone elsewhere and changed direction on a career that at the moment looks like it's languishing at the back, where his talent could easily put him far further up that grid. So let's explore that a bit more. What do Williams know? Well, this is a big regulation change where it's a massive chassis change as well as a massive power unit change. So Williams have clearly started to look, as all teams have, at what their predictions are, what they're working on, which elements of the car and chassis together they might be able to combine to exploit potential opportunities in the regulations. Just in the same way that Mercedes did and enticed Lewis Hamilton away from McLaren all those years ago, ahead of the big change for 2014. These were predictions. They were just things that the teams were projecting ahead that could be the case. They were things that there was no real evidence to prove to Lewis Hamilton back then that this was going to be a great move for him, but they were able to convince him through talking about how they were going to go about the regulation change, what plans they're putting in place, what structural and organisational changes they were putting in place, who they were working with, what measures they'd be taking, what level of investment they were putting into certain areas. And I suspect James Vowles, who we know is working on a long-term plan to bring Williams back towards the front, will have been having similar conversations with Alex Albon. But I think it's interesting that Alex has taken those conversations on board, heard what has been told to him about the future for this team, and as a result of all of that, committed his future to, as I said before, the team that at the moment is last, is at the back of the grid. That must have been some kind of convincing conversation from James Vowles. I think that's interesting. I also think it's interesting because there has been talk about Adrian Newey's next move. He's committed over the course of this weekend to the fact that he thinks he will make another move in Formula One. We're not looking at retirement for Adrian Newey. He will be back at a new team. So who's it going to be? The obvious choice, of course, is Ferrari for lots of reasons. The Lewis Hamilton story, the Ferrari that are heading back towards the front, that haven't won a championship for ages, with a big regulation change. It makes so much sense for Adrian Newey to go there and help bring the glory days back to Ferrari. But what about if it is Williams? What about if the same conversations that James Vowles has had with Alex Albon he's had with Adrian Newey? What if Adrian Newey was part of the conversation that James Vowles has had with Alex Albon, and that's part of the reason that Alex has seen fit to commit his long-term future to this team? I have no actual evidence for this, but there are starting to be rumours around Williams really going after Adrian. It would be a lovely sort of full circle story for him. It would mean that he wouldn't have to move his home and his family out to Italy, which a Ferrari move would likely necessitate. There are lots of reasons, with a massive change on the horizon in 26, with a Williams that's partway through a rebuilding process, and they have somebody at the helm of that Adrian, I think, will trust and respect in James Vowles. There's enough reason for me to think that that is not a story that we should just dismiss easily. Could the future for Williams look like one that has Alex Albon as a lead driver and Adrian Newey as a lead designer? Keep watching this space. Whilst we're talking about the F1 driver market, it seems more and more clear that the key to unlocking any potential moves, including that of Carlos Sainz and anyone else who's yet to sign a deal, is still Max Verstappen. And this is not because Max hasn't decided where he's going to drive next year. I'm pretty sure it would make perfect sense for him to stay at Red Bull. They are highly likely to have a car that is dominant, or at least in the mix again in 2025. But he's not yet seemingly willing to commit to Red Bull for 2026 because that's still a massive unknown. And I'm not sure that he or anyone else yet has the full confidence that Red Bull, together with their brand new engine unit, will be able to deliver a power unit in such a really key change of regulations that is able to dominate the sport in the way they are now. And if he hasn't got that confidence, is he keeping his options open? Is he having conversations with Mercedes in the way that Lewis Hamilton had them all those years ago about a future move there? And if he is to do that, if he is thinking about a 2026 move to Mercedes or anywhere else, then that means that no one else is really willing to commit their long-term future, which will take them over 2026, knowing that there could be a potential seat at Red Bull. Certainly that is what's going on with Carlos Sainz at the moment. He's got an offer on the table from Audi, but he can't really commit to that until he knows what Max is doing, because he doesn't want to pass up the opportunity, if indeed it comes along, to take the lead seat at a Red Bull team that has been so dominant over the years. You'd be mad as a driver to pass up that chance if it was on the horizon. But it puts him in a very difficult position, because what do you do when Audi are saying, right, we need a decision? And they do. They can't hang around forever. They need somebody to sign up and take that seat. They want it to be Carlos Sainz. But Carlos is in this sort of really difficult zone where he can't commit one way or the other, and everyone's waiting for Max. But Max is in no real hurry to make that decision either. At some point, Carlos is probably going to have to make the choice, and I suspect he will end up at Audi, but it's a really interesting dilemma, because there's a stack of cards that will all start to move and tumble if and when those two drivers commit their future. So that is definitely one to watch. The idea of Max going to Mercedes is not as silly as it sounds, because in all the same way that we've talked about Alex Albon at Williams, potentially Adrian Newey moving as well, in the same way that Lewis moved to Mercedes back in that last big regulation change all those years ago, a big reg change like this, and this is the biggest we've ever had in the sport, really resets the playing field. So you can't go on past results, you can't go on current form, you have to go on how the team are building now towards that regulation change, what things they're putting in place, what senior hires they're making, who's moving around from the engineering and design department. And there's a lot of that going on in the background right now. Mercedes, by the way, making big changes. Yes, they've lost some key personnel, but they're also hiring too. There's a lot of people in the background of Formula One seeing this as a great time to move. It's like the transfer window in Formula One. We're building towards this big regulation change. Now is the time to be resetting your team, rebuilding your team, and putting the right people in place so that you're ready for when that change comes along. Mercedes, of course, have their own dilemma, because Kimi Antonelli, this young driver who they tested recently, everybody is very, very impressed with. And they don't want to let him go. Not only do they not want to let him go, they certainly don't want to lose him to another team. In the past, it's exactly what happened with Max Verstappen. They weren't able to offer a race seat to Max in the beginning. Red Bull came along and said, look, we'll put you in a race car right now. We think you're that good. And that's exactly what they did in their junior team. And the rest is history. Well, Mercedes have George Russell, of course. They're losing Lewis Hamilton. Do they put Kimi Antonelli in next year? Or have they got this potential of Max Verstappen joining the team? And if they do that, what do they do with Kimi Antonelli? This is such a complex driver market right now, perhaps the most complex it's been for many, many years. And I don't know which way it's all going to go, but it's going to be fascinating to see it play out over the next few weeks and months. Anyway, in the race today, I thought Max did an absolutely wonderful job. Under pressure for the first time in a long time, we saw him really handle that pressure well and deal with it. The whole Red Bull team, I have to say, dealt with a very difficult weekend in a brilliant way. It's a way that they haven't had to do for a long time because they've had it so, relatively speaking, easy. But there's no doubt about it, McLaren are nipping at their heels, and they have brought those upgrades to both cars now, which are generating the kind of performance we've been longing for and they've been longing for. And it's only a matter of time, and it could even be just next week in Monaco, and I will be there to witness it myself, but it could just be next week where we see a real battle on our hands, where it's not all about straight line speed, of course. It's about getting a car that's compliant and getting the drivers in the right zone, comfortable with their car. At the moment, it seems the McLaren drivers are more comfortable than the Red Bull drivers over the course of a whole weekend. And let's not rule out Ferrari. They are very close. The race pace from the top three teams over today's race was within a few tenths of each other. Average race pace over the entire Grand Prix, there was nothing in it. And that is brilliant. That's something we haven't really had for a long time. We've been crying out for. The end of this season, and I say the end, there's still 17 races to go. That used to be a whole season when I first started Formula One. The latter part of this season, together with next season, could be incredibly interesting as the performance begins to converge more and more, and we get some great racing on our hands over the course of the 24 race season. Aston Martin need to up their game. They brought upgrades and it just didn't work. They had an awful weekend for them, so they've still got work to do. We know Alonso's committed to that team, so that is one major mover or major driver who's not moving anywhere. So they've got some stability. They still need to decide what to do with their second seat, and of course the obvious choice is Lance Stroll, as long as his dad owns the team. But if they have aspirations, as I've said before, if they have aspirations of building this team into a championship contending team, I don't think it's going to be with Lance, with the greatest respect. I think that's about all I need to cover in this week's episode. I thought it was a really dull race in the most part, but it really came alive as the tyre performance shifted. And that's all about tyre temperature. It's about how much you use your tyres at different elements of the race and how much you save for later on. And there's a lot of learning that will have gone into or come from today. The teams will analyse all of that. Very different strategies in terms of that tyre usage between Red Bull and McLaren. And it was, you know, a couple of laps from being, if it was a couple of laps longer, there's every chance that Lando Norris may well have managed to reel Max in and overtake him. So you could say Red Bull played it absolutely perfectly, because there weren't another couple of laps, were there? He judged it to perfection. But it was fascinating, and I think we're in for a treat as the season rolls on. Right, that's it for this week, but I would love it if you go and download the SeedStream app. You'll find the link in the description of this video. I'm pretty sure you'll love it as much as I do. But just an extra incentive, this week I'll be giving away copies of the F1 2024 game, brand new, which I've done the voiceover for. It's all complete, and I'd love you to have a copy. All I need you to do is go and follow at SeedStream app on Twitter or X. That's where we'll be giving it away, so go and give us a follow, keep an eye on that social platform, and I'll give you all the details as and when we're ready on how you can win it. Good luck, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, I'll see you soon, ta-da.